This is Bernie Riley at the Center for Research Libraries. This will be a 90-minute webinar. The format will include speakers, 4 speakers, and we have a question and answer period after each speaker. We have muted everyone's phones because we have about upwards of 180 registered participants in the webinar this afternoon. So the muting of your phones might sound totalitarian, but the purpose of it is to keep there being an unmanageable amount of background noise coming in. We do invite you to participate, though, by way of the chat function. You can chat your questions for the speakers at any time during the presentation this afternoon. We will then feed those questions to the speakers at the appropriate moment. A number of you, actually quite a few of you, provided some questions when you registered for this webinar, and those we'll do our best to cover as many of those issues and subjects as we can during the course of the webinar. We are recording today's webinar, and so we will post the recording with the PowerPoints on the web in a reasonable amount of time after today's webinar. So the webinar is part of the CRL Global Resources Forum. The Global Resources Forum is a set of activities, events, and online resources designed to support library investment in electronic resources and services. The Center for Research Libraries community of about 270 independent and academic research libraries in the U.S. and Canada and Hong Kong invest annually upwards of $1 billion in electronic resources. Global Resources Forum is the way CRL is what CRL does, really, to make that investment as informed a process as possible. We pool expertise from the community to provide cogent and independent analysis of an evaluation of digital resources and services. So text and data mining is relevant to that activity. Text mining is generally defined as the automated processing of large amounts of structured digital text content for purposes of information retrieval, extraction, interpretation, and analysis. Data mining, on the other hand, automatically extracts and analyzes structured data from large data sets, large structured data rather than text, and provides interpretation, analysis, and visualizations based on the data. Text and data mining are used, for example, to detect patterns in the frequency or occurrence of words and phrases in large bodies of text and data, relationships between words and phrases based on their placement and proximity in the text. The products of these operations can be in a variety of forms, for anything from statistical tables to new data sets to simple histograms or complex visualizations. Why is CRL interested in text and data mining? Well, CRL has, since 1949, supported scholarly access to primary sources and to data for research in the humanities and social sciences. We provided long-term access. We ensure long-term access to large bodies of news, government information, economic and political and historical information. So to provide that kind of service or those kinds of assurances to our community, text and data mining are a very important very important concerns with us. We have had some experience recently with requests from researchers for large bodies of material, and we've accommodated those in our traditional way, which is normally to lend large bodies of print publications or long runs of microforms of print publications to people, to researchers. CRL in the past few years has gotten into digitization of materials and delivery through electronic means. And the there is a growing demand, a growing interest expressed by our members in the in being able to mine and to in those kinds of bodies of material. So we have a technical interest in text and data mining, and we do see a growing interest in it from the humanists and from the social science researchers. CRL also licenses or negotiates the terms for access to electronic databases for its members. Gale's 19th Century Collections Online and a number of news databases have been electronic resources that CRL has negotiated terms of access to on behalf of CRL member institutions. We think that the rights and capabilities, or rights and abilities to do text mining, will be an important part of those negotiations in the future. We have provided a number of people that, that registered for this webinar, expressed a lot of interest in the technologies of text mining and data mining and the actual uses of it by humanists and researchers. CRL did sponsor a webinar. We held a webinar back in November, which has a fair amount of information on the growing use of text and data mining and growing demand for it and the nature of that demand. Also, in that the presentations from that webinar are on our website. Back in April 2012, we also held a conference, New Horizons in Primary Source Research, where library people from the University of Chicago and George Mason University reported at length about the new uses of primary bodies of text by researchers at their institution. So there's a fair amount of background information there as well. So obviously, text and data mining is a complicated process and it's a complicated matter. It presents some interesting and complex challenges to libraries and publishers, and we have a long way to go to truly understand it and to truly respond to the amount of demand there is out there for it. Clearly, though, publishers are going to have a role in enabling text and data mining. So that's the topic of our webinar today. We have 4 presenters today. Eefke Smit is Director of Standards and Technology at the International Association of Science, Technology, and Medicine and Medical Publishers. She coordinates the activities of the STM Future Lab Committee, the annual STM Innovation Seminars, and the STM Research Data Working Group. She has developed several successful scholarly information products, among them Scopus TM, Cirrus TM, and Science Direct TM. TM, I assume, stands for text mining. She has also spent many years in the print world of academic publishing in fields such as physics, astronomy, engineering, computer science, and mathematics. Our second speaker will be Carol Ann Meyer, who is who runs business and development and marketing for CrossRef. Carol Ann is an information industry professional with 25 years of experience in publishing and product development. She's consulted with participants in the scholarly publishing community on marketing, market research, product development, and production issues. She's also held strategic product management positions at Aries Systems, Northern Light Technology, and Silver Platter, and has served as Director of New Media for Little Brown's Professional Division. Mark Seeley, our third presenter, is Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Elsevier. His areas of expertise are publishing ethics, copyright, intellectual property, access, and distribution licensing. He's a frequent speaker on copyright and public policy issues at publishing and scientific conferences, and he heads up Elsevier's Global Legal Department, which addresses corporate organization and compliance, mergers, acquisitions, and, most relevant for today, copyright policy. He's also the chair of the Copyright Committee of the International Association of Science, Technical, and Medical Publishers, and he's a member of the Copyright Committee of the Association of American Publishers. So those are our 4 presenters, and Ann Okerson will be providing commentary. Ann has been for the past few years Senior Advisor to CRL on electronic strategies. So Once again, we invite and encourage comments and questions through the chat function throughout the presentations, and we'll give you an opportunity to give the speakers an opportunity to answer your questions at the end of each of their talks. So, first up, Eefke Smit.
Hello, my name is Eefke Smit, and I'm happy to present to you my overview of content mining, a short introduction to practices and policies. This is a summary of a study we carried out for the Publishing Research Consortium, and the full study is available on the PRC website under the link displayed on this slide. To get a better understanding of content mining, it's probably best to first look at a potential user. For the study we did, we interviewed close to 30 people active in this area, and one of them was Professor Yost, who is a Dutch professor in Amsterdam at the Netherlands Institute for Neuroscience. This professor is active already since 1982 in the area of neurodegeneration. That has to do with repairs to the spinal cord, for example, after injuries. This is a field that has become very active in the last 2 decades, and since he entered this field, there are about 90,000 journal articles of relevance for his work. And what is more, on average, 22 journal articles appear per day on this topic. So what does that mean for his daily workflow? Professor Verhagen would very much like to avoid reading all these 22 articles every day, and instead have an easy way to pick out of those articles the things that he really needs to know. For example, which molecules are being tried and tested? What do they tell us? He said in the interview, you would like to have for each of these molecules a meta-analysis about what is already known about them. But of course, he's looking at a vast volume of 90,000 articles. So the real key question of content mining is the following. The essence of text and data mining is, if there's so much information to analyze, can a machine do this for him? If a machine does it, because there are many text and data mining applications and tools nowadays, this is more or less what you will see when an article is mined. In this particular case that I took from the NCBI website, where there are several mining tools available, you can see that the article is mined for the genes that are mentioned in the article, chemicals, diseases, and species. The genes have been highlighted in yellow, chemicals in green, diseases in orange, and species in blue. Underneath the article you see a table where they're all summarized again, with click-throughs for more background information on each of them, somewhere on the web or in other articles, etc. It is important to note that text and data mining is not just important at the article level, but the real value comes if you do this across a lot of articles. 20,000, 40,000, the earlier mentioned 90,000, those are typically the amounts where text and data mining is used for. And what people then try to do is find the relationships between the articles. How many articles mention this gene with that disease? How many articles have found a relationship between the gene and the disease? Etc., etc. So patterns, relationships, and more of a meta-analysis. So to summarize, typical text mining consists of processing of large corpora of text in an automated way to identify all kinds of elements in that text. And text mining output typically consists of a new metadata layer for the information. This can range from well-known categorizations and indexes and article clusters, also to more sophisticated topical maps, databases with facts, patterns, relationships, and more in recently visualizations like graphs, plots, maps, etc. I want to give you a few highlights of the study that was commissioned in 2011 by the Publishing Research Consortium. It was carried out by myself and Maurits van der Graaf. As I already mentioned, the study contained a whole number of interviews with experts from academia, from research, libraries, vendors, and publishers. And then we concluded it by a quantitative study, a survey among publishers from CrossRef and STM. We had around 190 responses, and the survey tried to give a better insight in the state of the art, how publishers are coping and facilitating text and data mining. Again, here's a link to the website where you can find the full study. In this summary, I'll just give you the highlights in a bird's eye view. This area, perhaps just like normal life, consists of optimists and pessimists on text and data mining. People who are skeptical about text and data mining, they point at the fact that this has been around as a promise for, well, probably 20, 30 years, and they say it has always overpromised. So far we only see it occurring in specialized fields, especially in the pharma area, in chemistry, with tools that are very complicated and very much oriented to a particular niche. There's still a lot of manual creation necessary. It requires high investments, it's domain dependent. The lack of a common dictionary makes it very difficult to expand it, and there's still a lot of overambition in the promise of real knowledge discovery. On the other hand, there are optimists about text and data mining, and I clearly have the impression that the optimists are gaining a lot of ground, especially since, let's say, since the last year, and most certainly so since we did this report. Optimists would typically point at the fact that the digital corpus available is growing and growing every day, also with a lot more digital born content, and of course 20 years ago that was not so much the case yet. We see text mining appear in more and more application areas, also for business, advertising, marketing, in the legal area. The tools are improving fast. That means that a lot of manual work is reduced. There are very interesting public domain applications. For example, if you look at Google Ngram View, then you can see how combinations of words or certain sentences have occurred over time or have disappeared over time. And optimists, in summary, they will point at three things in particular. Computer processing power has increased enormously. Analytical tools are much better nowadays. And also, all the visualization methods make it much easier to look at content mining output. Because as you saw, the output can be very granular, but you want to synthesize that to a proper meta-analysis. Okay, so far optimists and pessimists. In the survey we did, we wanted to find out what the level of optimism or pessimism is, and we found that publishers are generally very optimistic. This is just a quick view. I won't go through it in detail, but the general message of this picture is that the more green you see and the darker the green, the more optimistic the respondents were about certain statements to which we asked them to agree or to disagree. Same is the case for the next picture, where you see a few more statements, and at the bottom you see one reply category which contains more red, but that is because that was a negatively phrased statement, and it said content mining will remain limited to certain subject fields. And you can see here that 50% or perhaps even 70% of the respondents do not agree with that, or hardly agree with that. So all the optimism is there, and on the other hand, publishers so far do not yet get many mining requests from third parties. This graph shows you the frequency of requests that they get in, varying from downloading or crawling requests to also illegal downloads or crawling, individual research project requests, etc., etc. Overall, you can see that the darker the green, the higher the number of requests is, but in very few cases that goes over 10 requests per year. Much more often, the typical number of requests that publishers get is between 5 and 10, or even less than 5 requests per year. And in some categories where you see the red bars stick out, those are the kind of requests that even never reach any publishers. I should add here that perhaps in practice it's not always easy for people who want to do a text and data mining request to know where to go at a publisher. And conversely, we've also found out that at some publishing houses they do not really know, or they struggle with how to deal with such a request, which may also mean that some requests were done but didn't end up at the right desk. We didn't measure that exactly, but from the interviews we did get some impression like that. If and when the requests get in, we asked them how they were usually handled. And the overall picture is that publishers are liberal in allowing mining. The greener you see the bar, the easier they are. And you can see that in the top bar on the picture, that in nearly 90% of the cases, publishers generally grant permission for text and data mining. If it is for permission on text and mining for research purposes, there's even more willingness to say yes, and you can say that you can see in the bar that is one from below that in a majority of cases publishers will grant permission, 60% of them for research type text and data mining. In nearly all cases, publishers want to have information about the intent and the purpose of the mining. And that basically means they want to know where the output of the mining goes and how it is treated. That has to do with the fact that for mining, a lot of copying of the content takes place, and in the mining results, a lot of that content is made available, could be made available elsewhere. So usually the mining permissions have some limitation on how the mining results can be disseminated, and to whom and for how long, etc., etc. In many cases it's also a fact that if the mining results produce links back to the publisher's content, that would make publishers usually very happy. Here's a picture about the mining plans that publishers have for their own content, and again you see a lot of green. There are a lot of plans underway, mostly to improve the navigation through the content, but also to enrich the content in all kinds of ways. In the study that I described for the Publishing Research Consortium, we've also asked all the interviewers if they had specific suggestions in mind to facilitate content mining better. And throughout the interviews we got a lot of ideas, and we have categorized them in 5 broad ideas. The first one is standardization of content formats. That is very important to make it ready for a mining tool. Secondly, the idea was raised to have one content mining platform where the content of many publishers was brought together in a mineable, ready form. The third idea had to do with commonly agreed access and permission terms. Right now, a text miner would usually have to go to several different publishers, and each of those publishers would have slightly different permission terms, which doesn't always make their life easy. The fourth idea was to have one window to get these mining permissions. So that would solve the multi-point permission problem, so to say. And the fifth idea was to collaborate with national libraries who could possibly set up content mining platforms and facilities. These ideas were tested in the survey, which was the second part of the study, and here you see the outcomes of that. The green bars say for every answering category how many people reacted positively, and you can see that the standardization of formats had more than 60% positive replies. The red bar gives the people who gave a negative reply to that, and again for standardization of formats you see that it's less than 10%. And of these percentages we produced what we call the popularity index, which is simply the plus of the positive answers minus the percentage of the negative answers. And this means that the suggestions are categorized in order of preference in this way, as you can see here. And on the next slide I want to show you that there was a slight deviation in the replies between all respondents and between the experts only. The survey asked people to self-rate them as experts, so there was a question, do you regard yourself an expert in this area? And the people who did had a slightly different preference in order for solutions. There was similar consensus on the standardization of formats and how useful that would be, but there was a difference in the next two preferences, where experts see more in agreed permission terms and have a few more fears about the difficulties to come to one mining platform, so they put that one grade lower. Last but not least, because this study is now exactly 2 years old, I want to point at many of the new developments that have taken place since, and I do this on this slide, because the study has sparked a lot of discussions, brainstorming, new ideas within the publishing community, and suddenly there's a spark of many new developments, because publishers are very keen to facilitate text and data mining better. In a one-liner you could say, if people can do more with the content, that is really what publishers aim for. So the more they can do with the content, the better, and text and data mining is very clearly a good option to do so. So if we look at the idea of commonly agreed permission terms, there have been several interesting initiatives. The International Association of STM Publishers, which is my own organization, has published a standard clause for text and data mining that we encourage our members to include in the licenses that they agree with libraries, and this is for the possibilities to undertake text and data mining on the subscribed content that they have. There is also a standard clause by STM customized for the pharma industry. Pharma has always been very active in text and data mining already for the past 15-20 years, and there was a clear demand there from the customers to get more clarity on what is allowed and what is not allowed on subscribed content, but also on unsubscribed content. And this standard clause has been established together with the Pharma Documentation Ring, which is an industry body of pharma librarians. Then there was the idea to set up one window for mining permissions across publishers. There we see a new initiative by the PLS and the CLA, that is sort of the UK sister of CCC, and they are launching this month a prototype especially to serve small and medium-sized publishers, where people can come with their mining requests and then PLS CLA would handle them for all the publishers that they represent. Then, of course, there's the idea, which was the most ambitious one, to obtain mineable content in one place, perhaps even in one mining platform, and or provide standardized APIs and standardized content formats. This is very clearly something that, if it is made available, that could give a real boost to text and data mining. And I want to point here at two initiatives that are taking place. CCC is experimenting with one content mining platform, and then there is the CrossRef project Prospect, which would provide a single point web access for multiple publishers, where people can obtain in an automated way their API keys for the contents that they want to mine. And that would be all from one place with a click-through license, etc., etc. Caroline Meyer is the next presenter, and she's involved in this project. She's from CrossRef, and she'll be able to tell you much more about that. So, I wish to thank you very much for your attention and the time given here. I'm really happy with the invitation by CRL. I hope this has been a useful summary of what text and data mining is, what people expect it to be, what the promises are, what the new possibilities are, how publishers approach it, and most of all, what the solutions are that people are working on. I thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Eefke. That's a good segue to Caroline Meyer, who will now speak about CrossRef. Caroline?
Thank you. Prospect is a pilot project from CrossRef. We're the organization that brought you reference linking through DOIs. And it seems to us that text and data mining is exactly the kind of thing that fits with our mission, where we do collaborative work that has a technical and standards base that individual publishers in particular, because our members are publishers, can't do by themselves. And so CrossRef is in a unique position to expand this current infrastructure, which is this registry of DOIs, to make text and data mining easier for researchers and for their institutions. Prospect is a technical solution. We're not actually addressing the issue of license terms, which is why I didn't want to speak to Mark's slides. But we are making it easier to find out about and agree to terms that multiple parties may have. And I'll show you an example of that in a bit. Prospect is also not a discovery tool. We're not making it possible for researchers to find out what text is available for mining necessarily. We're assuming that the researcher already knows what the content is that they want to work with. Next slide, please. So just a real brief update on CrossRef. We're a not-for-profit membership association of scholarly publishers. We have about 2,000 members. And those members represent about 4,400 international publishers. Although we're probably best known for STM journal articles, we have all subjects, including the humanities, and all business models, open access, subscription publishers, all content types, books, chapters, data sets, etc. CrossRef has 83 non-publisher affiliates. Some of those are aggregators, as Eefke just mentioned. And we have 2,000 library affiliates who use the CrossRef query system for free to identify either DOIs or the metadata associated with those DOIs. And currently we have assigned DOIs to 61 million content items. Next slide, please. So that brings us to Prospect. And again, this is a pilot. Publishers and researchers share the same problem, and it's the same problem had when they decided they wanted to do reference linking from their own references to the articles in other people's content silos. And the problem is this. It's easy enough to create a bilateral agreement between one publisher and one researcher to do text and data mining. But it's not so easy for multiple researchers and multiple publishers to have that same kind of agreement. So our solution is basically to create an application programmer's interface so that we can allow this handshaking, if you will, to go on without a lot of overhead. Subscription publishers find it very difficult to negotiate individual licenses. Researchers find it very difficult to negotiate individual licenses. Judging from the comments on the registration list, librarians are not quite sure what role they can play and how they can help the researchers, whether they're interested in doing so. Next slide, please. So the API that we're talking about is actually content negotiation. And I'm going to take a little time to describe what that is, and I'm going to do a dramatic reading of some gnarly-looking XML, but rest assured I'm a marketing person, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But essentially, Prospect is a way to negotiate content so the researcher can access the machine-readable full text. It's also a central repository, not of the text itself, but of the license terms that participating publishers are using for text and data mining. And it's also a means for publishers to check to make sure that the researchers have agreed to the terms and conditions for text and data mining before they proceed. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about content negotiation. Next slide, please. And the first thing to know about content negotiation is that it's very similar to putting a URL in a web browser. If you click on a DOI for a journal link, they're basically redirected to a URL. They go to the abstract page of that article. And what's actually happened is the user's browser has sent a request saying, give me HTML, which effectively means give me something human readable. But that same DOI has been enabled for content negotiation. Next slide, please. And so it's possible to send a request saying, give me machine-readable data for an application, and then to specify that format. May I have that next slide, please? And again. And this is what that machine-readable format would look like. Can you click Enter, please? And that's just a different parameter when you submit the DOI. Rather than asking for HTML, you'll ask for code, essentially. Next slide, please. It's possible to get non-bibliographic data about the content in CrossRef. CrossRef is building up a lot of information about content in addition to your basic, author, title, page, volume issues. With ORCIDs, we'll have verified, disambiguated IDs for individuals, and we're already accepting ORCIDs in the database. Next, please. Next, please. So this is an example of some code around an ORCID deposit for a particular bibliographic item. Next, please. Because we also have a service we just launched called FundRef, we'll have funder names and grant numbers, and you can see those here. And again, that gives you the funder identification, the name of the funder, and so forth, which is a whole different talk. Next, please. And so what we envision is that in addition to the bibliographic metadata, the ORCID metadata, and the FundRef metadata, we can also provide prospect metadata for licensing terms for text and data mining. And I'm going to go into what this code actually means in just a second. Next, please. So just in summary to where we are so far, content negotiation basically serves as an API for accessing the full text for text and data mining purposes. Publishers just need to register the URIs of the full text content that's allowed for this purpose. But the question remains, so how do researchers decide whether the full text is available? So again, we're trying to make this as machine-driven as possible and not requiring a lot of manual intervention. Next, please. So what we've postulated and we're putting in our pilot is something called a license reference tag. Next, please. Now, right now, NISO, which is a standards organization, is looking at creating article-level or chapter-level metadata about access. And the problem is that there are a lot of hybrid-type publications where some things is open access and some things are different, so you can't necessarily say that the license for any particular item is the same as the license for the title. For any of you who've been participating with any standards organization, you know that that can be a little slow. Next slide, please. And so while CrossRef is very interested in that work, and we're actually sitting on the NISO working group on that project, in the interim, we're creating this license reference tag, which allows you to just put a URL, not you, but the publisher to put a URL of where the license that governs text and data mining would actually live. And this example just shows a CC license. Next, please. It's also possible to extend this license, not just to have a URL, but also to have start dates and end dates. And what this would do is this would allow publishers to support embargoes. So they could say that the license is effective this date and ending this date, so it might be free after a certain time. Next, please. So as I said, NISO is working on a fuller specification. We can record existing terms through a URL now, and are planning to do something about handling embargoes. It's, of course, very possible that publishers want to use non-standardized licenses. So Eefke mentioned there are a couple of standardized licenses that have been developed. There are probably more that will be developed, but we all know that publishers like to do things a little bit differently. So what happens there? Next, please. So part of Prospect is what we call the license registry, which is a centralized place for the exchange of licenses. Next, please. And how it would work is this. The publisher registers the license with Prospect. The researcher reviews and accepts or declines that license. And then Prospect gives the researcher an API token, which is just a really ugly string of letters and numbers that tells the publisher that they're allowed or not allowed to use the material. Next, please. So here's a pilot. This is actually kind of a working, it says beta, but it's really an alpha prototype of how Prospect would work. I'm just going to take you through a couple of screenshots. So the researcher comes to this page, and they sign in using their ORCID. And we're not actually planning to support any other kind of sign-in. So you have to have an ORCID to use Prospect. Next, please. Next, please. So you've signed in. You authorize Prospect to use your ORCID ID. Next, please. And then you get a screen where it says, who are you, what's your email address, and it'll have a list of the licenses that your content that you're requesting applies to. Next, please. So you have an ability to review that license, and you can actually click on the tab, next please, where you could review the text itself. Next, please. And you can choose to accept it, next, or to reject it, or you can decide to do it later. Next, please. That API token, that ugly string of letters and numbers, is going to remain the same regardless of what you do, but CrossRef will attach metadata to that string that will tell the publisher whether the terms have been accepted or not. Next, please. So the researcher looks for a DOI using this content negotiation and the token, and the publisher verifies the token with Prospect, and they can do that at any rate that works for them. And then if they verify the token and they allow access control, then they return the full text to the researcher. Next, please. So Prospect provides the publishers can simply return the text if the researcher agrees to the license. So that basically eliminates this bilateral negotiation, assuming that a publisher already has license terms that fit text and data mining. The other thing that this allows for publishers is it can revoke tokens. So if a text and data mining system isn't particularly sophisticated and they're hosing the system, bringing down the server or some such thing, the publisher has the ability to shut that down until it works in a more well-behaved manner. Next, please. So I have to mention again, this is just a pilot. We're starting the pilot later this month. We have both publishers and researchers in the pilot, and we're specifically looking for researchers to participate. So any of you who commented that you have been getting requests from researchers about trying to figure out how to access full text for text and data mining, we'd be happy to hear from you and talk with them about participating in this pilot. We're not exactly sure what the schedule is. It looks like it might be later this year or early in 2014. So I know that's a lot, and I know I went into some code which was ugly, but that's the overview of what Prospect is trying to accomplish, and I'm happy to take any questions. Next, please.
Thanks, Carol. If you would like to submit questions, please use your chat function now. Meanwhile, while we're waiting, Carol, one of the questions that came up from registration was that how would the types of licenses for text mining be negotiated with the publishers? And with Prospect, you talk about the publishers can sign on or can permit text mining, data mining, but or they can not permit it. But it's not always a binary choice, is it? Are there different grades of permissions that go with text mining? I mean, for the ability to download whole bodies of material and do text mining locally, for instance, as opposed to text mine something that's still hosted on the publisher server?
Yes, that's true. And there's also differences between someone who wants to do text and data mining who may already have subscription access and someone who doesn't, or a publisher that is an open access publisher but still wants to control the text and data mining activity on their content. All of those use cases can be handled. On that screen where you saw the multiple licenses, the researcher can actually read all of the available licenses and choose which one's appropriate. Now, that's not to say that there's never going to be a case where an individual publisher is going to have a negotiation with an individual institution or researcher, because there are certainly a lot of creative scientists and scholars out there who may want to do something that the licenses couldn't have anticipated. So CrossRef is not actually trying to solve that problem. We're just trying to get the, I would say, the low-hanging fruit or the short tail. Those which just need basic access and where terms can kind of be agreed.
Okay, thanks. Someone has asked that if there's a researcher at their institution who is interested in working on text mining through CrossRef, should they be in contact with you, Carol, or?
Yes, just send me an email at Meyer, Meyer, at crossref.org.
Great. Okay, and could you repeat what does the researcher do with the API token?
Well, the researcher doesn't really have to know anything about the API token. The prospect system will have the full text URL, and so the prospect system will send the API token with the URL to the publisher's site.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Good. I think we're going to move on. Thank you, Carol. We're going to move on now to Mark Seeley from Elsevier, who will be talking about enabling TDM and text and data mining through contract forms. Mark? I think we have to ask Mark to unmute his phone. By pressing *6.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good.
This is Mark Seeley. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've enjoyed the presentations myself, and I've learned a lot, and naturally I'm going to talk a fair amount about both STM issues and CrossRef issues as well, so nice tie-in. So my task is to address the question of contracts and TDM, and to do that I'm going to go over some relatively recent licensing history and some history of recent researcher requests, because in my view, ultimately publishers and their agents and organizations like CrossRef are going to be responding to what their customers and users are requesting, and that's going to shape the licensing structure. So it's a question of responding properly. So I'm going to start off by talking about traditional publisher license language. Then I'm going to discuss some recent models from the university institutional sector. I'm going to discuss some requests coming out of the pharma industry in particular, which Eefke mentioned before. Also talk about individualized scholarly research requests. And then I'm going to go into the suggested contract language and approaches, which I hope will be more systematic and more standardized over time. If we go to the first slide, we see a discussion here about traditional publisher license models. Now, these license models broadly permit searching across the database corpus of subscribed content, and often, I think, generally permit the downloading of search results. So if you think about that, what that means is the creation of a downloaded personal library. To some extent, that supports TDM. Certainly users could probably apply TDM processes to the downloaded corpus. These licenses anticipate that certain very specific uses will be made of the downloaded results of course packs, research indexes, and the like. Usually, in my brief search here on on other people's licensing language, I didn't find any specific references to TDM. What I found is the general language about the personal use of those downloaded libraries or private research use. That clearly, to my mind, contemplates the creation of that personal library and the use of it. As I said, it may cover TDM, but it's not covering it in an explicit way and not very clearly. I don't think that's a surprise, because most of the models for the traditional publisher licenses were developed more than 10 years ago, and frankly, this issue had not really been a focus of much of the discussions then. If we go to the next slide, we'll see some discussions here about recent statements and models which have been promulgated by entities such as the California Digital Library and the UK-based JISC organization. And you'll see that these are much more specific about TDM. The JISC model license from this year addresses it, although it doesn't really define it. The 2011 CDL model actually does define it. It talks about the extraction, the manipulation of information, which is pretty close to an actual definition, similar to the definition that Bernie described in the prefatory remarks. Go to the next slide. Here, so far we talked about publisher licenses with very general usage clauses. We talked about some suggested language from the university community to more specifically address CDM. But also I wanted to talk about the fact that we've seen a lot of demand from the pharma community, which Eefke mentioned, officially to the Licensing Best Practices Group, PDR. Now, pharma has a strong commercial interest in TDM. They see this as a way of identifying potential new pharmaceutical solutions, identifying new potential beneficial uses of existing results. At the same time, pharma's got a strong interest in confidentiality. They don't want their competitors to know what types of connections and areas of research they're individually pursuing. So these kinds of discussions that the two publishing trade associations, ALPS and STM, have been having with PDR have had to address both this question of confidentiality, how exactly TDM can occur, and had to also address the fact that API protocols were not really well developed in early 2012 when these discussions were first going on. We did agree the general statement on TDM, which you see here, and we also have more extensive proposed license language for TDM in the pharma setting, which actually then became a model that we used for non-commercial scholarly requests as well. The main reason why there's a discussion here about the use of either API or a locally loaded, downloaded content set is because of the concern, as I believe Eefke mentioned, of the potential impact on a publisher online site if widespread crawling and searching is going on in a way that could destabilize the system. Go to the next slide. So it's clear that the requests for individual scholarly research projects are a bit slow. We've received at Elsevier some 20 such requests. We've received other requests to do more commercial products, including from pharma industry. So the number is probably larger than this 20, but there's about 20 requests over the past 2 years for individual scholarly research projects. So that's a relatively low pace, you could say. And you might have a question about why it is so low. I do suspect that it's possible, and I believe the PRC study mentioned this as well, that it's probably actually difficult to find someone at a publishing house or a collective rights organization from whom to get permission to conduct TDM research. It's not always easy for researchers to figure out how to do that. I don't think there's any question, however, that this is an area that's increasingly important and that researchers are increasingly interested in. I think particularly those areas of research which are sort of border areas or are very multidisciplinary, where it's possible that results in one field may be of significant relevance to another field. And I think that's a growing trend broadly in science. So thinking about this notion of how do we prepare and how do we ramp up, Elsevier has been thinking about a way of offering a TD option in our subscription license, and we've now got that available. It's also, by the way, very similar to the STM Association model clause that Eefke mentioned. And we have developed an API for researchers for this purpose. We've also opened up for other application developers to think of other, even more brilliant ideas about how to do this. The next slide. So I'm kind of an optimist. I guess count me in the optimist category about a standard model license. I appreciate the CrossRef view that it's likely, particularly thinking about the long tail of publishers and the many hundreds, if not thousands, that many publishers will insist on their own license language. But I guess I am kind of hopeful that the work that the STM Association has done on model clauses can actually be used and will be helpful for publishers to work through, who knows, perhaps even agree a kind of standard license approach here. What the STM Association has done, and there's tiny, tiny language at the bottom of this slide, but it's actually a link to the STM Association site where you can see all the relevant documents, is it actually has a definition of TDM, which is kind of rare in licensed language and proposed language. And it also provides a number of rights in terms of usage, sets out some conditions under which those rights are granted. For example, it doesn't like the idea of crawling and scraping publisher online sites unless that's done through an API. But I think also, quite importantly, it talks about what the output, what can be done with the output, how the output is cited, how the output is used, and how the output is then posted on websites. So I think it's important to think both of the, if you will, the license that's granted to a user to access a publisher's site to perform TDM, but it's also important to think about what the license that will be associated with the output is like. On the next slide, talk a little bit about some of those collective efforts that have already been mentioned, including the initiatives of CLA, CCC, CrossRef, which has a little bit to do with the easy permissions process, but also actual access to a database of content. Caroline already mentioned the notion of the use of a Creative Commons license, possibly for TDM output. The STM Association, in an effort that was separate from this effort but maybe related, has also been working on some alternative, easy-to-understand usage license that would be similar to a Creative Commons approach. And we have that language has also been uploaded to the STM Association site. I'm hopeful that actually CrossRef and STM will talk together about whether or not we could at least suggest to publishers a kind of a common approach, or at least a common set of principles with respect to the license, potential licenses, both for users and researchers, but also on the output side. I'd just like to conclude by saying that publishers are very interested, and that's why I think they show up as optimists, in supporting scholarly TDM research. I think we want to make sure that TDM does not have a systems impact, and otherwise could be misused. On the commercial side, and thinking particularly of our friends in the pharma community, if there are commercial opportunities, I think publishers want to think them through, and that's why was a reference made to the idea of requests actually being made fairly visible and transparent to publishers so that they understand what the requests are, to enable the publishers to think through the commercial opportunities and the commercial possibilities and make the relatively commercial decisions about whether to participate in those. I think most publishers make a strong distinction between non-commercial scholarly uses of TDM and more commercially oriented TDM. So thank you very much. I enjoyed the presentation so far, and I look forward to any questions.
Thanks, Mark. We are opening the chat to any questions people want to ask. We do have one question, meanwhile, which is a follow-up question for Carol Ann, which was that is Prospect a subscription service or is it a free service? And the Carol responded that the decision about that hasn't been made yet. There's no decision that's been made about a business model or marketing for Prospect. What they're involved in right now is a pilot product or pilot project. So, Mark, you had mentioned about the pharma, the kind of commercial applications of text mining, and with organizations like the pharmaceutical firms. Is Elsevier actually providing them tools to do this kind of thing at this point, or is this still kind of a case-by-case basis?
It is pretty much a case-by-case basis, and I noticed in both with respect to that question, but also in some of the other questions that folks had submitted earlier, that there's a question about whether or not publishers are going to be creating and developing tools. I think that's not happened so far. It's possible that it might in the future. I think in some respects where the publishing community is probably a bit more on the passive side, it's more about researchers, and that could include commercial pharmaceutical researchers, probably have their own ideas about what tools would work for them, how to make those tools work, and then look to publishers or possibly through the collective organizations to apply those tools to the content. So I think there's definitely going to be questions about standards, of course, to make sure that the content is enabled to do as much of the kind of searching and indexing for particular types of uses. But I don't think publishers are really actively out there working on lots of different tools. We do have a couple of commercial products that are essentially the result of TDM. So we've done some products that involve mapping of information from different sources and combining that with other related things. So we've got a few very specific products, but I think the tools are always going to be very specific to the research category and the area of research.
Uh-huh. Have you, I wonder if Elsevier has had any experience with the linguists. The linguists is a particular discipline, linguistics is a particular discipline that has been doing text mining for some time. I think Ann Ogerson pointed that out at our November webinar, that the interest was early on there, and I wonder if Elsevier has heard from them as well as from the pharmaceuticals.
We have, of those 20 sort of scholarly requests that have come in, some of those have been in the area of language issues, and you often do hear those kinds of requests as being strong examples of text mining. So yes, we have had some. Okay. I suspect that if we published more in social science and humanities, we might be getting more of those, and probably publishers that are stronger in those other fields will be getting more.
Okay, someone has asked, in the definition of TDM, what does actions refer to?
Yeah, so lawyers are always tasked with trying to create definitions. And I think the problem that we often have is that this is about both text and data. And I think in the PRC report, for example, there were probably more specific examples of how you would define things for data as opposed to text. But I mean, actions. I think it's a variation of relationship, I would say. So that where there are relationships between things, or where one action or one fact has some active impact on another.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you, Mark. I think you answered a lot of the questions that people had sent in beforehand, and I think we're ready. Oh, I think one more question. What are the prospects for similar standards or standardized approaches emerging for TDM via the aggregators rather than the originating publishers? This is from someone who works with humanists interested in text mining historical documents that cross the public domain threshold, and also social scientists who want to mine news and legal materials.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of questions about news in particular, and frankly, I'm not quite sure what the news media thinks about these issues. I think that the aggregators are, in almost all cases, going to have to go back to their primary source providers and ask them questions about the scope of rights granted to figure out whether or not they can offer TDM options to the aggregated content. My guess is that's going to be kind of a secondary thing. Once I think we get established methods for TDM in the kind of primary sources, I think then it'll have some follow-on effect in the secondary sources or aggregators. But my guess is that'll take a little bit more time to work through.
We have seen actually at CRL some uses of large bodies of digital news text in business school applications, in people studying economics and political science and public policy. In particular, people doing bias analysis of long runs of various newspaper coverages or news organization coverage of particular topics like the U.S. Congress over time. People using text mining tools or in some cases just human tagging to determine whether there's a bias, say, toward the liberal point of view or towards the conservative point of view, that kind of thing. In that cases, they've been working directly with the aggregators like ProQuest and Gale, and then the aggregators that actually have gotten some rights from the original publishers of the news to provide, but that tends to be on a pilot or experimental basis.
It's made more complicated when there's also public domain stuff that's mixed in with proprietary and copyright materials, which I know is a question that comes up in thinking about the Google Books program, where there is that mixture. It does make it difficult.
Good. All right, thanks, Mark. Now I want to introduce Ann Okerson, who's going to offer commentary. I described Ann earlier as CRL's special consultant on electronic resources, but that kind of sells her a bit short. Ann is also the founder of Live License, the online information service about licensing issues and terms and concerns. Ann was also the founder of the Northeast Research Libraries Consortium back in the 1990s. Ann, you're on deck now.
Okay, I think I've become unmuted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I thought this was all really, really interesting. Those of us at CRL have had the opportunity to see the slides earlier and to talk to our speakers. So I'm cheating a little bit. I have some very superficial comments, which is what you can do in about 5 minutes. And they're mostly in the all about me space, all about me being the librarian's view of all of this. So just a few thoughts here. First of all, I was interested to hear the reported numbers of requests for data mining and how small they are. My own gut says that there's something incomplete with how those numbers are being collected, and that explicit demand is actually quite a bit higher. And I think we all, the speakers and I all agree that potential demand is very much higher. We can therefore surmise that there are interested researchers who are simply rolling their own text and data mining in ways that aren't yet on the radar. So I'm just going to repeat and say that in my view, visible demand is going to rise quickly, quite soon. The webinar really helped me to see more fully the different difficulties that loom ahead for all parties. Some of those are licensing and access issues that our presenters have spoken to, although I'm not sure that librarians are involved in publishers' formulation of model language in this area, and I'm wondering if CRL can talk to our collaborators here today to think perhaps about how to include a librarian point of view as model language is developed at their end. Maybe that's unrealistic, but since Mark is an optimist, and so am I, maybe there's something in there. As he says, some very good license work has been done by libraries and consortia. And a number of licensing questions were submitted in advance. I think that we at CRL could plan to follow up on those questions and send out some additional information to our members pretty soon. I should also add that I think librarians don't want to see a future where libraries and researchers have to depend on costly publisher tools and services, in addition to large sums that we already pay to some of those same publishers for electronic resources. And I don't know if publishers are not the ones who are selling these services, then perhaps it's a non-issue. I don't know enough about it. Another comment that struck me is that open access content has, I believe, a real advantage with respect to text and data mining, at least for articles, with respect to the thorny issues of seeking permissions or describing licenses across numerous sources and journals and databases. This particular aspect is something that the current efforts of publishers, I think, will not find easy to deal with. It is very complicated. Other issues that have to be resolved are purely technical. I won't go there. I don't know enough to go there. But many are customer service issues, and that's where we get to, it's all about me, it's all about the librarian. The person who wants to do data mining without becoming a miner, him or herself, is going to have trouble getting the best results out of even any prepackaged service. So there's going to be demand not just for mining, but for steady help in getting to the point where a mining project becomes effective. I make these points because it seems to me that we have some important librarian opportunities. Librarians know their communities, help them understand what data mining can do for them, can connect them to tools and resources that they need, and that is our job. I think right now TDM gives us an opportunity in some cases to get ahead of our scholars and students. We could perhaps feature talks, information on the web, instruction or orientation sessions about TDM, and the new doors that it can open for study and discoveries. We could share these ideas with each other. Librarians are really excellent organizers and outreach people. I think there's also a really important potential here for the data mining savvy non-technologist librarian who knows how to sit with an end user and interview him or her, perhaps propose a strategy, perhaps also reach out to other people in the community, in the institution, and work with that user on a pilot exercise, run some queries against a small percentage of a whole set, see if the results look good, and if they're not quite right, then the librarian and the user and the team can talk some more about what is being looked for and what seems possible, revise the queries, and try again until the full project can be mounted. This to me sounds very similar to the kinds of things that reference librarians already do, especially those that are increasingly being appointed to be data or GIS or digital humanities librarians, as well as others. So just in conclusion, I'm going to say that within the research community, expertise in knowing what is possible and in helping novice users take advantage of it has been very much a part of the librarian profession for a long time. And to transfer this to the world of TDM, working with our researchers and our publishers is going to be hard work, but it kind of seems a natural fit for me. And that's about all I had to say, Bernie.
Great, thanks, Ann. That's a good summary and those are very good comments. We're going to open the lines up again for questions by chat. So, and questions for Ann and questions for any of our speaker, but we'll start with questions for Ann. While we're waiting, I did want to remind people that a lot of what we talked about today were commercial databases and commercially available content. A large amount of the text mining and data mining that we've been seeing, we at CRL have been seeing happening, has been done on the open access corpus, or the corpora, of the big bodies of text, things like Wikipedia and WikiLeaks. There's been a fair amount of mining of the WikiLeaks cables and information that they put out for various purposes. The Eefke mentioned Google Books, the tools that the particular tool that Google has made available for mining of the Google Books corpus, that Google Ngrams tool which is easily findable on the web. PubMed Central has also been a source of mining for people in the for researchers in the health sciences and the medical area. That's the open access repository of articles on medical research findings that's available. With the recent mandates from the White House on open government data, the one in May, directing all U.S. government agencies to make their data openly available on the web, and the earlier OSTP directive, White House OSTP directive that said that all the funded research, that articles published based on research funded by the federal government had to be posted on the web and open access too. Those two open government and open access initiatives will probably put a lot more content out there, and that's all likely to be mined with tools that are the tools themselves are either open source or proprietary, off-the-shelf kind of available tools. So that's just another side of the coin.
So Bernie, can I make a comment? It's Anne. The fact of publishers giving readers the ability to read anything they want and to excerpt from it and so on may not necessarily equate to a wide open text and data mining capability.
I would echo that, Anne, if you don't mind my break in. This is Carol. So I think there are a couple of things that need to happen with text and data mining, even for open access publishers. And one is that publishers actually may want to set up separate servers specifically for that crowd, so that it doesn't impact the reader, the people who are looking at the HTML. And so while it certainly is much easier in terms of license negotiation, there are still some issues for open access publishers that need to be addressed to make this seamless for everyone.
Absolutely. Yep. That is the case, and it's one thing to not prevent text mining by closing off materials, or walling off content, but it's another thing to enable it, and we're pretty far apart on those two things right now, it seems. There was a question: how can an open access publisher, for instance, such as the Public Library of Science Plus, best make their content easily accessible for TDM? I think that's related to what Carol just said. Carol Ann, that's a question for you.
Yeah, I think that PLOS is a CrossRef member, and if they wanted to participate with Prospect, they basically would be able to sort of track, who's doing text and data mining. They wouldn't charge anything for it necessarily. They could provide a specific URL for people to go and find that information. They may even put that information in a more machine-readable, friendly way. Prospect is really designed for not just subscription publishers, but for open access publishers as well. Well, I should say it will be designed because it is a pilot. Sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. I do want to add one other thing. There was that earlier question about the business model, and I just wanted to clarify, CrossRef has never yet released a service where we charge end users or librarians. So when I said we haven't discussed the business model yet, it's true. Our process is we do the pilot first, we work out the technical stuff, and then the board decides whether they want to go forward with it or not, and then we start talking about the business stuff. But I didn't want to leave the impression that it's likely that CrossRef would charge researchers for this.
Great, thanks for that clarification, Carol. Okay, well, I would like to thank our 4 speakers. Gwen, Inette will do a quick wrap up, but thanks very much to Eefke, to Carol Ann, to Mark, and to Ann Okerson, our commentator for today. Thank you all for putting up with the technical difficulties we had early in the process.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with us today. You almost have ears of steel, so we really appreciate it. And thank you so much to all our presenters for all the time that they put together for this event. Again, really appreciative. I just wanted to let you know about a few more events that we have coming up. Our webinar schedule, we average about like 1 a month, so you can find out about this through our CRL Connect newsletter. We do send out frequent emails or on our website. So coming up in September, we have licensing and acquisitions with our own Mary Wilkie here at CRL. Collections and services in October is kind of a nice back-to-school webinar. It's kind of our overall CRL collections and services, so it's a good refresher. Or if you have new staff who aren't as familiar with CRL, we really suggest that you attend that one. It's a 60-minute webinar that'll be in October. And then government data on October 23rd, and there'll be more events, obviously, as the calendar progresses. Next slide, please. We also have a pre-conference at Charleston in November from Nexus to WikiLeaks, the new marketplace for government information. More information about that is available at Charleston's website, so that link is there. And then, of course, our annual meeting happens every April. It'll be coming up in 2014. Next slide, please. So again, I'm going to send you all out a follow-up email that'll have a lot of this information on it. I know people always wonder about the materials from the events, which will be on the event page, so I'll send you the links to all of that. Right after this event, when this event ends, a follow-up survey is going to pop up. We really appreciate your attention to that. We really love comments. Kind of predicting there'll be a few about the audio, which is totally understandable, but about the content, the presenters, anything has really helped us as we improve our webinar program. This event and many others are available on our own YouTube channel, so you can check that out. You can always look at our website, and please sign up for CRL Connect. It honestly doesn't pummel you. It only comes out like maybe once or twice a month, just with updates from the Center for Research Libraries. And we're on Facebook, and we're also now on Twitter, so you can find us there as well. So thank you again for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon.